Just want to say thank you to Bruce. This last series in Unexpected Jesus, we've been kind of taking a deeper dive into some of the unexpected pieces in the story of Jesus, in the life of Jesus. And that's something that I really love, is to kind of dig deeper into maybe some of the cultural context of what's going on, and just really getting to learn more about what makes it stand out and what's so important, and sort of the effects that it has on our story. And last week, Bruce was talking about the coronation of a king, and we looked through the account in Mark of the crucifixion, and that was really powerful to see sort of what was going on there, and comparing it to sort of the coronation of a king that would happen in that day to the Caesar that was coming in. So thank you, Bruce. I hope you're having a good time away right now if you're watching this. And so Bruce asked me to step in this week for him, and so I kind of asked, do you want me to stick with the current series? Do you want me to kind of do my own thing? He's like, well, you can do whatever you want, really. And so I kind of landed somewhere in the middle, because we're going to be doing Unexpected ABRAM today. And I think that for me, the story of ABRAM is one that from a young age that I heard in Bible school, learned the song Father Abraham, and so it's one of those stories that I think that we become familiar with, and oftentimes I think what Bruce is trying to highlight with this series is that we can become comfortable and sort of gloss over stories and just say, yeah, I've heard this story and I know what's going on, and we take it at face value, and we can still benefit from that, but there's sometimes a lot more that's going on. And I think that for me, there's something that I learned actually from a podcast that some of you may be familiar with, called the ABRAM podcast. That's a great resource for things like this, that I learned a couple years ago and that really impacted me, and I wanted to share it with you today. So we're going to be talking about the proposal, and sort of a proposal that happens in Abram's story. I reached out on Facebook on Friday night to all of you, and I wanted to hear your proposal stories, but no one commented, so we're not going to have a lesson. No, just kidding. Fortunately, there's the internet, and there's a lot of cool proposal stories on there, so we'll take a look at some of those. This is Lindsay's getting proposed to, and she kind of looks like she's freaking out, but I thought this one was pretty cool. This one, there's a tattoo artist that tattooed on his own leg this "Marry Me," and then got his new fiance to check yes or no. I'm hoping she checked yes. That'd be kind of bad if not, but this one was actually Connor and Briley's proposal at an escape room. That Connor set up this whole elaborate escape room proposal that was really cool, that I was able to be a part of. I'm surprised that Connor didn't go with this method, "Will you McMarry me," with some chicken nuggets. And then there's this last one here that was quite weird and unexpected. This guy on the right here, his name's Alexi, and he loves this girl Irina, so he says, what better way to propose than to fake my own death? So what he does is he hires a production crew, makeup artists, stuntmen, coordinators and everything, and he stages this horrific car accident. And he calls up his girlfriend, Irina, and he says, hey, meet me for lunch here. So she pulls up, and she sees his smoking car. He's laying ejected from the car on the ground, blood all over him, and she's just bawling. And then he gets up on one knee and proposes. And I think that's probably something that I would try and do, but I'm assuming she tried to kill him after this before she said yes. So lots of really cool proposal stories out there. Comment yours on Facebook if you have one like this. But we're going to be looking at a proposal in Abram's story, and one that I think is kind of unexpected. But to go into this, I think we kind of have to go back to the beginning of Abram's story and take a look at sort of what's leading up to this in Abram's story. I'm just going to take a drink of water first. So, Abram, we're introduced to him in Genesis, and we know that he's married to this lady Sarai. Excuse me. Sorry. He's married. Sorry about that. Sorry for your eardrums. So he's married to this lady, Sarai, and she's unable to conceive. He's with his family there, and this is where we see God jump into the story. In chapter 12, the Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So God comes in to Abram's story in a big way, and he says, I'm gonna do a lot of great things for you and through you for everyone, and you're gonna be a big part of my story. And so Abram says, okay, and him and his wife and his nephew Lot, they pack up, they get all their possessions, and they've got a lot of people with them as well, servants and whatnot, and they say, okay, let's go. And so they travel out to the land of Canaan, and they arrive there, it says, and when they arrive, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who appeared to him. So Abram does what God asks, and God says, "I'm going to give this to you. I'm going to give this to your offspring." But keep in mind sort of what implications this has for Abram, right? He's married to a wife that can't bear children. He doesn't have any children right now. So the closest thing to the offspring would be his nephew Lot, right? And at this point of the story, this is kind of where things start to go sideways for Abram a little bit. There's a famine in the land. And so with this promise that God's given him, that he's going to bless him, that he's giving him this land, I would probably feel a little uncertain and questioning, okay, what's going on in this story now? Like, am I going to be blessed? Because now I have to feed a bunch of people, and that's kind of hard to do right now. So Abram packs up, and they go down to Egypt. And that Abram's trying to figure things out by himself, and he gets into sort of a mess in Egypt. And what happens is Abram and his wife, they have to Abram has to lie about his wife being his sister so that he doesn't get killed by Pharaoh. And it's a really messy situation. Eventually, God curses Pharaoh and the Egyptians with sickness. And they say, "Get out of here, we don't want you." And so they leave with a bunch of Egyptian wealth and servants and whatnot. They head out of there. And then the story kind of gets a bit messier from there because Abram's group and Lot's group now, they've gained possessions, they've sort of accumulated a lot of people too. And so there's these two big groups, lots of livestock with them as well. And they're finding that there's kind of feuding going on, and there's not enough land to support them both on it. So Abram says, you know what, let's split up because there's not enough here for you, and we're given all this land, so you go that way, I'll go this way. So they say, okay. And keep in mind, like for Abram, his offspring right now is Lot, and Lot's leaving him, right? But this is where God steps in again, and he says to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, "Look around from where you are, to the north and south, to the east and west. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I'm giving it to you." So God comes in and he says, "Abram, listen, I'm gonna give this to you. You're gonna get the land, your offspring will be blessed, and you're gonna have many, many offspring." He says, I'm with you here, and I want to keep helping you. But this comes at a time when Lot's just left, and so probably a bit of confusion on Abram's part, like, okay, but how's this going to happen? And the story gets a bit messier from there. There's some battle that Abram has to go into to help Lot, and God steps in again, and he says to Abram in a vision, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." But Abram said, "Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus?" He goes on to say, "And Abram said, you have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir." So he starts off by asking the question, I have no child, and you're telling me all these things that you're you're my great reward and you're going to give all this to me, but I have no idea how this is happening, so like, how's it going to happen? And there's kind of something interesting that happens in here between these two slides here. It's at the beginning it says, but Abram said, blah, 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 and then, and Abram said, blah, blah, blah. And what I learned is that oftentimes when this happens, there's sort of a Hebraic literary tool that when you have one person say something like this, and then nothing, and then, and Abram said, that it can indicate sort of two separate conversations or like a passage of time, right? And so you can kind of see here, Abram goes from asking the question and then no answer. And maybe at this point he's a little more frustrated and he's just saying, you've given me no children. So at this point, I just have a servant and he's going to get it. And he's probably kind of confused and trying to wonder, like, where does this fit in with the story? But at this point, God does respond back to him. It says, the word of the Lord came to him, this man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. He took him outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited to him his righteousness. Now God also says, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it. But Abram said, sovereign Lord, how can I know that I'll gain possession of it? So there's been a lot of confusion for Abram in this story, a lot of, him stepping out in faith, but then things get messy and he tries to figure out on his own. So he's asking God, show me, where is this going? And so God says to him, bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Abram brought all these to him, cut them in two, arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. Now, this is the point in the story that's a little unexpected for me, at least when I read this. God asks, bring me these animals. I'm thinking, okay, maybe it's some sort of sacrifice. But then Abram goes on to cut them in two, arrange the halves opposite each other. He does things with the birds, and I'm kind of wondering, like, okay, is there something special going on here? And it turns out that Abram does know what he's doing. This is sort of a picture depicting kind of what's going on here. But this is called a blood path covenant. And it was typically sort of a marital covenant used in the time. And so Abram knows exactly what's going on. And he's sort of entering into this proposal. And so what would happen in a typical situation is there would be the two parties. There would be the son, and then there would be the father of the daughter that the son's going after, right? And they would be entering into this covenant together. And how they would set this up is kind of how the picture looks. And they would set the two halves on each side of sort of a ditch so that it would create this blood path or like a stream of blood. And sometimes they would exchange robes even. They would wear light robes. And the first one to enter through would be the lesser of the two parties. In this case, it would probably be the son who's asking for the daughter's hand. And so they would walk through, they would sort of stomp through and splash up the blood onto their robes. And then next through would be the father who would also go through. And once the two have gone through, essentially what this is symbolizing is if I don't hold up my end of the deal, you can do this in my blood. And so it's a little bit of a graphic promise, but essentially for the son it means, if I don't take your daughter to marry her and take care of her, then I'm putting my life on this, and you can do what you want with my blood if I don't follow through. And the father's saying the same thing. If I don't give you a daughter who is worthy of your hand in marriage, then you can do this in my blood. And so it's this deep covenant that these two parties would have to go through together. And after Abram sets this up, it says that there's birds of prey coming down to pick on the meat, and Abram's trying to shoo them away. So I'm imagining at this point, there's maybe some drops of sweat forming on Abram's head, and he's realizing who he's entering into this blood covenant with, this proposal sort of. And, he's dealing with the creator of the universe. And Abram knows that from his past with trying to figure things out on his own and going into Egypt, and we know later in the story with him and Sarai trying to, get a son by Abram sleeping with her servant, that they're going to get confused, worried, and they're going to try and do things on their own. And the story's going to get messy that way. And Abram, knows that he's going to mess up. But, and it reminds me of sort of this show that I watched when I was younger called Undercover Boss. And if you don't know the show, it's basically like there was this, a CEO of a company would come in and they would go into a disguise and wear like a big beard, and often they just kind of look like a normal dude. And then they would go and work a frontline job, and they would sort of take note of what's going on in their company and see like what's happening there. And if you look it up, like some of the stuff, the employees are just not good, and it ends up in a lot of people getting fired. But my favorite part of the show is by the end of it, when the boss comes back with no disguise on, and he says, "Hey, I'm the boss." And just the face of those people and their hearts just sink, and they realize who they're dealing with. I think at this point in Abram's story, he might be thinking the same thing, like, I'm entering into this this covenant and this promise that, if I don't follow through on my end, then, my blood is in God's hands to do whatever he wants with it, right? But then something really special happens, and I'm just going to read through it for the next few verses here. In verse 12 it says, "As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, 'Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure.' When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, 'To your descendants I give this land, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites.'" I mentioned in my last message that I really love Lego, and I actually found a cool sort of depiction of what's going on here in Lego. So you see here Abram, in the text it says like he's in this deep sort of revelation sleep, or and God's coming to him through there. But for this one, he's watching the smoking pot and the blazing torch pass through these pieces that he's prepared for this covenant. And we've seen that later in the story in Exodus, when the Israelites are being led out of Egypt and into the wild, there's a pillar of smoke and flame that are leading them, the smoke by day and the flame by night. And so we see here that these two presences of God that are passing through these pieces before Abram here to complete this covenant. And to me, when I see this, it just speaks to God's grace with us and where He, or what He wants from us. And He knows exactly what Abram knows, that Abram is going to get confused and worried and try and figure things out on his own. And God says, "Abram, I'm going to pass through this for both of us, on both of our parts, because I still want to partner with you, and I still want to do great things through you and bless the nations through you. But I'm going to take the responsibility through this." And I think that that when I first learned about that, it impacted me greatly because it spoke a lot to what God wants in us and sort of the relationship that we have with Him and with Jesus, and that God meets us where we're at, and that He knows that we're going to have our own anxieties, and we're going to mess up, and we're not going to always be perfect. And so He meets us there. But thankfully, in Abram's story, this isn't where it ends for him. And he goes on, and there's some messiness, but he enters into new covenants with God, and ones that Abram is called to a higher level to serve a higher purpose in God's story. And he goes on, and through all that, then Jesus comes, and that enters into our story. And I think the same for us is true, that God meets us where we're at, and He also calls us to enter into His story, and to take comfort that Jesus has taken on this for us, for both of us, but He wants us to play a big part in His story. And so I just wanted to leave you with this reminder to trust the story, because we see throughout this that's often what God is saying is, Abram, trust the story. I'm here for you. I want to bless you, and I want to bless people through you. And I think that God wants the same for us in many different ways, and He's calling us to trust the story and remember that we're His children and a part of His kingdom. And we're going to enter into a time of communion, but if you haven't had a chance, you can grab a cup from the back. It looks like this, and we'll get into that right away. Okay. I'm going to read here from Hello? Okay. So I'm just going to read here from Romans 8, beginning of Romans 8. So it says, "Therefore, there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, because through Christ Jesus, the law of the Spirit who gives life has set you free from the law of sin and death. For what the law was powerless to do because it was weakened by the flesh, God did by sending His own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh to be a sin offering. And so He condemned sin in the flesh in order that the righteous requirement of the law might be fully met in us, who do not live according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit." And so just as God entered through the blood path covenant on both parts for Abram, so did God similarly sent His Son to die and to be an offering for our sin, so that we can carry out a life not with condemnation or fear, but that we can live by the Spirit and be a part of God's story. And so for that we can be thankful and celebrate and remember Jesus' death.